So we're going to talk just really briefly about LDA's Healthy Children Project, and then talk a little bit about lead poisoning, and have Katie share their curriculum, which is free and available to any teachers, and also to volunteers who want to, share it with their local schools. Next slide. Katie, there we go. So
it was just a little delay.
Yes. So, the science is very clear now. Neurotoxins or chemicals can harm children's brain. We know that learning and developmental disabilities can result from a complex interaction of factors. So we know, of course, our genes, right? You can have a mom with a learning disability and who has a child with a learning disability. Low birth weight can impact children's brain health and processing, nutrition, but also toxic chemicals in the environment. We know that prenatally, fetuses and early children's brain or early childhood brains are extremely vulnerable to harm, even from very low doses of toxic chemicals. So I give the example of medications, right? At very low doses can have a good or bad impact. So can chemicals at a very low dosage that exposes a fetus or a young child during a critical time of brain development. According to the National Academy of Sciences, environmental factors, including chemicals, contribute to at least a quarter of learning, attention, and developmental disabilities. So they say about 28%, about 3% chemicals they think is the only cause, and another quarter, might have genes or nutrition or low birth weight, but also have a chemical exposure. So the way I explain this is like a light switch, like genes can be the electricity to that light switch, but what might turn on that disability for a child could be a chemical exposure. We can't change our genes, but the good news is we can prevent chemical exposures. Next slide. So some folks might wonder why the Learning Disabilities Association is talking about chemicals. Our Healthy Children Project program works to prevent exposure, especially to pregnant women and young children, to harmful chemicals and substances that are linked to learning, attention, behavior, or developmental disabilities like autism. And we do education, we do policy work, and we also pressure big corporations to make changes and get rid of chemicals that can harm children's brain health. And we look at reducing exposures in products, food, water, and air. Next slide.
This is an introduction to the Ecology Center. I am the education director at a nonprofit that's located in Ann Arbor and Detroit, Michigan. And the focus of our work is healthy people and a healthy planet. So we really specialize in these areas where environmental factors and human health factors are kind of intersecting. And so that arises in areas around climate and energy, especially in the realm of equity. We do policy work, for example, on making sure healthy homes, that protections are there for low-income housing, these sorts of things. And ending lead poisoning and PFAS contamination are big areas of work for us. There's a lot of work around plastic pollution and zero waste, air quality. And then we also have an in-house Healthy Stuff lab where we have researchers that are actually looking at toxins in everyday materials that we're interacting with. And we do our work by going out into the community and organizing. So, for example, we had a campaign called Breathe Free Detroit, where we participated with other community organizations and helped to coordinate organization to get an incinerator in Detroit shut down, and we're successful at that. Another area we do work in is advocacy, that's a big part of our work. So actually working with lawmakers and trying to help draft policy. As I mentioned, we do research in-house, and then I am the head of our education team. In a lot of respects, everybody in the organization participates in education to different sectors. A lot of what the education team that I'm focused on works on is actually children and family education. So residential groups and going into schools and that sort of thing. So what is lead? Lead is actually a material that occurs naturally in the earth. It's been used for most of human history for tools, ornaments. It's been used as an additive in materials like paints and gasoline. But it is very poisonous, and it has these impacts on the nervous system and brain, which can cause harm at extremely low levels. And as Tracy mentioned, is particularly potent in young children. We know that there's no safe level of exposure to lead, and it is something that stays in the body. Although it's been banned from some uses, it's still very common in our environment. And that's because it was used for a long time and it sticks around. And there are certain processes where lead is still used today, actually in manufacturing processes and that sort of thing. Lead poisoning is not reversible, but you can prevent it from happening in the first place. So how does it get into the body? You either ingest it or inhale it. And then so just touching lead isn't going to get you sick from it, but if you touch it and then you lick your fingers, then it will. And if it's been aerosolized so that you inhale it or it's in dust, that's another way in which it can enter the body. So for example, if it's in dirt, that's outside in the garden and you start digging up because you're in an industrial area, that's one of the ways it can end up entering people's bodies. Once it's in there, it gets into your bloodstream and it acts to reduce the level of oxygen that the blood can carry. So it kind of blocks the binding of oxygen to our hemoglobin. And it gets carried to our organs, like our brain, our kidney, our liver. It also acts in a way to interrupt calcium signals. And so the way nerves work and the development of new nerves and stuff gets hindered by the presence. And then so it circulates in the blood and has these potent impacts and interferes with that nerve development, especially in young children. And then what your body also does is stores it in your bones and teeth. So it starts to accumulate over time. And in periods of stress, for example, when your body's in pregnancy or like sometimes other kinds of stresses, if you've got it accumulated in your bones and stuff, it can leach out into your blood and you can start to manifest symptoms and stuff. So, so it sticks around, our body stores it. What are those impacts? We see behavioral connections like ADHD, aggression, hyperactivity, like in general aggressiveness, can be a part of a behavior. Learning challenges that are often tied to attention deficit or having trouble with problem solving. With adults, when you see that accumulation over time and what it can start, how it can start to manifest in the body are things like hearing loss or hypertension, Parkinson's, kidney damage. So, some of these conditions that we think of as like chronic conditions over time. It is a problem everywhere. It is not, something that's localized to urban areas. It's not something that's localized to a particular population. It is all over the place. And so these maps are just, you can look at all sorts of things. You can look at water samples. You can look at topsoil samples. You can test the blood of children that are 6 years old. And you'll find evidence that it is all around us in our environment. And so it is a serious problem. So the key, so again, the key to lead is prevention. Um, I'm going to pause for a second and say, are there any questions before I start to go into the curriculum piece of it, just about lead or anything like that?
There's nothing in the chat.
Thank you. All right. So how do we approach something like this? We're talking about chemicals that are toxic in the environment. It's scary, it's dangerous. Like when we go into like thinking about talking to families and schools, and your children in schools and stuff like that, especially young children, how do we approach a topic like this without like creating a negative experience, even though we want to also convey the seriousness of the issue, right? So our goals in designing education is to be raising awareness about the presence and why it's something to avoid. We want to help people understand what they can do to lower their risk of exposure, right? Because prevention is the best course of action, right? We focus on things with children and families, such as how good nutrition can help protect you, and learn how public health is influenced by actions you might take or laws that are out there. And then one of our goals is to make sure that, like, when we go into schools, we generally try to design things so that there'll be something that goes home to families, so that learning with young children is being carried out into the family environment. How do we actually do this? We take a storytelling approach. We use very evidence-based kind of activities, and we do a lot of hands-on learning. We focus a lot on the positive actions that people can take and the resources that are available rather than fear-mongering. We don't go in with we don't try to scare people. We talk about it as a matter of fact situation, and one that there are ways to handle and what we're trying to do to handle it. And I'll give an example of that from the curriculum later on. We also pay a lot of attention to the ways, like when we're talking to our audience, we are aware of the fact that children have agency in some areas and then do not in others, right? So we're very conscious when we think about the designing of our activities is what is it that kids can actually do, right? And then what is it that we want to convey to kids that they should, kind of can trust or ask of the adults in their lives to be doing, right? Like to kind of normalize the kind of behavior that adults or our community should be taking to protect us and to kind of create that kind of expectation of the adults in our lives and the systems, the policies and laws that we have. And then we also look at the ways in which our activities are aligning with schools' curriculum goals, because we want the schools to invite us in and to actually give us an opportunity to share this information. And usually they're focused on, is this going to help me with what I'm tasked to try and achieve educationally? Any questions about this before I go on? Okay.
Don't see any.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I don't see any questions.
Don't see any. Okay, sorry. Okay, so what we've created, and what I'm going to present to you today, is what we call Get the Lead Out. And it's two programs. One we designed for early, really early young kids, like pre-K, kindergarten, first graders. And then, and what's particular about that is like thinking about their orientation to the world, as well as we also are very careful about not having any independent reading as a part of any of those activities. And then with upper elementary school students, those would be like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, we assume an ability to read independently, and honestly, that upper elementary, you can go higher with grades with that. I mean, especially when introducing this material. most of the activities like you can do with middle schoolers and stuff, and they'll still be of interest and appropriate for them. So what you get with each lesson plan is actually a plan that describes the different activities, provides the instructions for them and learning goals. And then each lesson has downloadable activity sheets and materials. And each one also comes with a booklet, and I will show you what that looks like on a later slide, but it's an actual booklet that goes home with families. Okay, so let's look a little more closely at what is actually in each of these curricula. The Get the Let Out for the really little ones has 6 activities, and it's intended to be done over basically a 2-day. We've gone in and delivered it going in for an hour with the kids one day and then going in another day. You can break it up in all sorts of different ways. You can also, I'll just say, do a lot of these activities like with families or in homeschool kind of situations and these sorts of things. You can kind of pick and choose activities. They don't have to be done in sequence. And they, although some of them are written and structured with like for some group activity and conversation. Okay, so the first one starts out where you read a story. And this story is follows a 5-year-old child that's moving into a new house. And what happens is their family, it's an old house, right? They're moving from an apartment to an old house, and it needs to be remediated for lead. And what's really nice about this story is that the child is going through the situation and like learning about it, but is not responsible, right? Like it's the adults in the story that are responsible for taking the action and doing the things, but the child gets to see what is it that the adults need to do, ask questions about why are you doing this, that sort of thing. And in the end, helps get the nursery ready for her new baby brother. So there's things built into the story, like the mother is pregnant, so there's different things in which, she can't be there at certain things because she needs to protect herself and the baby and things like that are brought up in the story. So informative for kids, but also for any parent or adult that might be reading it, the story to the kids. After that, there's an activity that kids will do where they work in little teams to and they each get a room of the house, and it's flat, like they cut out on the left-hand side of the screen, and they color it, and they actually identify in their coloring. There's like things like there's dirt on the floor, and there's like paint peeling off a door, or things like that, right? And so they look around, and they use clues from things they learned in the story about where they might want to be careful about, like where there might be lead in the house. And so they kind of color the house, and then everybody in every group in the classroom has a different room, and so then they put the house together, and this is all very fun for them. And then they talk about how different people, could go into different rooms and could be doing things like maybe they come home and they bring good groceries that have, good food, and so they're gonna, make sure that what goes in the refrigerator is, something healthy, or, maybe they're gonna call somebody to come and repaint this room because it's got peeling paint, and things like that. So you have a little conversation again about them just applying some of the ideas that they've heard in the story about what people were doing to their little house, right? And then we wrap that up that day with a little poem, and they get to finish this little poem called Keep It Clean. And there's a lot of different things that they could put in Never Chew On, right? Because they've learned about a bunch of different things in the story about jewelry, about toys, about paint chips, all that kind of stuff. So that's one day with the little ones. And I'm going to pause for a second. Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, this is the one that is online as well as being able to get a hard copy, right?
Yes, like with any of this, like it's actually one of the things that the Ecology Center is doing right now is we're creating an online resources library. So it'll be really easy for you to like go in and just click a button and you'll be able to download the lesson plan and any downloadable materials. The book, this book, Our Big Old House, there's actually a link where you can like read it online. You can like put it up on a screen in the classroom and like flip the pages and it looks like you're reading a story. Or you can actually get a hard copy, a printed copy. We always give one to every classroom. And so if that was something that you wanted, we could figure out how to get you hard copies as well. But yes, it's virtually available too. The second day we focus on nutrition with the little ones. And we pick like one of the concepts that we convey to them is the idea, that protein and calcium and vitamin C are these important things. And so they get these cards and they're kind of color coded with different information, and they have to put them together. Like they have to run around the room and find classmates to put together a healthy meal. And then there's an activity where they actually build food armor. So they like use things that are healthy. And part of the goal of this is having them become familiar with what these foods actually look like in an unprocessed form. And then, oh, yeah. Okay. So, and that actually is a rather long activity. So so those two activities are what we do. But then the last thing is that folks get a take-home book. And I'm going to talk about the upper elementary program, and then I'll come back to that book because it's the same. The slide for that is after I've presented both of the other. So you spend some time though introducing this little booklet that they're going to take home to their families as the last activity with the little ones. Okay. The upper elementary program has these 6 activities as well. And we start off this one having the kids come in and they sit down at the table, and there's some materials in the middle of the table, and they are asked to examine these materials and pick them up, look at them, and stuff like that, and decide what they think has lead in it and what they think doesn't. And the real goal of the activity is that all of the items have been dusted with a material called glow germ. It's called glow germ. It's a powder that they use. I learned about it because they use it in when training like nurses and medical staff to understand what it really means to clean your hands. Because what happens is when you put a UV light, you shine a UV light on it, it'll show up. It looks invisible in normal light, and then you shine a UV light and you can see it. And so we use this in the same sort of way that they do with nursing training with this activity. The kids will pick up these things, you have a little conversation about what might have lead in it, and it's actually an opportunity to learn what folks do or don't know about lead, right? And the misconceptions that might be out there about what it is. And then you dim the lights in the room and you walk around and you shine the light and you say, like, this is not real lead dust, but there's such a thing as lead dust, right? It could be just in your environment on objects and stuff like that. So whether something was made of lead or not, you can still encounter lead in your environment in this way, right? So the kids are like, oh my gosh, there's this stuff on my hands. And it's a big wow moment for them. And then everybody washes their hands, and you actually can do an activity where you can teach them good hand washing practices. And they discover actually how hard it is, like how they're not cleaning their hands, like because it's very obvious with the glow the glow germ, you have to wash your hands really thoroughly to get it off. So it's a very effective, very memorable and wow moment activity for kids, and makes a lot of points about lead. We follow that up with the story for the older grades. And what this one is instead of being a storybook, it is a nonfiction book, but told from the standpoint, they have a little narrator that's like a 10-year-old kid that's like, I did some research because I heard about what was going on I heard all this news about what was going on in Flint and lead pipes, and then everybody was talking about that there are these lead pipes, and so I wanted to learn more about it. And then, so this is what I learned about lead. And so they're kind of talking to the audience all through the book, but all the information, it's a nonfiction book, targeted to a young audience. So the students can read that independently, read it in teams, and then there's an activity sheet to go along with it to kind of process what their takeaways are, what they've learned from lead. The next activity after that is what we call patient diagnosis. And one of the points of this is to actually have them be kind of applying some of the things they learned from the book. But one of the other messages from this is also that anybody could be exposed, right? Like, so they part of it is to break away from, like, say, having the assumption that it's only people who look a certain way, or only people that come from a certain place or have a certain background or whatever, right? But what it is that you get these little profiles, and then you kind of act as a little medical team, right? And you look at it and you talk about, well, what are the things in this person's environment or in their health history and stuff like that that might indicate that they might be at risk, right? But the takeaway at the end of the activity is all of these people could have been exposed, right? But it does get them to think about, like, they can look through and they'll find things like, oh, this house was built before 1970, and stuff like that. So that could be a way that they could be exposed, or, those kinds of things. So they can kind of make the connection with stuff that they've learned in the book. The next activity is something that the Ecology Center does a lot of within our programs, is to say, like, it's not just personal action. It's not just even like within your family action, that like makes a real difference in the world. It's when we start thinking about collective action and the way that we can participate in it, that, really can move things, right? And so with this, we create a game here to highlight the connection between those private choices and more general public health. And so the way it is that each kid gets a card to role play a perspective, right? So they're role playing a public service agency. Like, I'm the police, I'm a school, I'm a hospital. Somebody else is like, I own my own business, if somebody's just a resident that lives in the area and has like 3 kids or something like that, right? And so there's different stakeholders, basically. And the teacher presents this situation. Our state has a lead pollution problem. Lead water pipes need to be replaced. Lead contaminated soils from local industry need to be cleaned. Home and businesses across the state require lead paint removal, and residents need assistance with lead poisoning related health care. All these things. And our small town is required to raise $10 million to contribute to these funds to all the statewide work. And so what the students do then is that they're given some very specific criteria and information on their cards and stuff like that, and they basically negotiate how to get the $10 million, and they work first in like groups of like just public service people talking to public service people and stuff like that. And then there's a point which they do cross groups, where they talk about in mixed groups about people that might have different stakeholder interests. And one of the real big takeaways of the way this activity plays out is that initially everybody's asked to volunteer, right? Like, so you look at your situation, you look at, and like you make you say this is what our industry is going to contribute, like, and you're voluntarily doing it, right? And what ends up is that initially everybody's voluntary contributions never add up to enough. You never get the 10 million that way. So then you go back and you say, okay, so a couple new new laws have been passed statewide. There's these new requirements. There's these new there's some tax incentives. There's some restrictions on things and stuff like that. And now, given these new laws, go back and have another conversation and figure out how much you're going to give now within the policies and laws that are present. And people do, and then you get the 10 million, right? And so the message of that is that, when we create policies and laws that people will voluntarily give, and you were able to raise some money, and that was a good thing. But when you have certain policies and stuff in place, one of the reasons that they're there is to accomplish this kind of, like, if we want public health outcomes that look like this, sometimes we have to create these kinds of incentives and structures and stuff within our laws to actually get there. And it's a very engaging activity, and the kids really get into their roles and stuff, and it's kind of fun. And then the last big activity that they do is an independent research where they're actually, there's some information in the book that they've written at the beginning about nutritious foods. And so we circle back to that and we say, okay, there's a couple pages where there's like, I don't know, for 100 different vegetables and fruits and stuff that are actually pictured. And it's like every individual or a pair of students, picks one, and then they create an informational poster about it, and then you can hang them up in the school, and you teach others about nutrition through your informational poster. And so these are just some examples of the kinds of things that kids put together. And then here's the information booklet. So both the upper grades and the lower grades get this, and it's one for each kid goes home. And so it's a hard printed, paper printed. And you can also look at it online. So one way of sharing it with parents and stuff is through an online link. Now, this one is designed because we had funding for this program specifically for Michigan. So this one has some particular links in it that are Michigan specific, but the booklet itself can be easily edited, right? Like you could say other link. I mean, most pages would be for anybody. I mean, like they're educating about lead in general, but then there's a couple pages where it's like, and in Michigan, these are the people you contact. These are the organizations that are here and stuff. But that would be very easy for somebody in Illinois or Wisconsin or Delaware, to switch out what those actual links are. And you could at least share this virtually very easily and cheaply with families. So I guess, so my last thing is to just say, to open it up. I guess we only have a few minutes left, but, if folks want to ask or talk a bit about how you see this being useful with your connections in your community, and as a follow-up, I mean, this is the email. If you were interested, until we get our online resources library linked up, that will be on our website. For now, emailing us at education@ecocenter.org is the best way to contact us about getting materials or talking about ways in which that booklet might be helpful to you.